What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm coming back to you after the Cavs 124-113 win over the Utah Jazz. And Chris, out of the games that have happened, 3 over the last 4 days, this is not the one that I thought the Cavs would be in a dogfight in the last couple of minutes of the fourth quarter. The Cavs obviously have an average of beating teams by 20 when it comes to this season. How good they've been has been a testament to what their offense has grown and all those different things. Tonight was a little bit different. Chris, what did you see, and why do you think it came down to the last few minutes of this game where the Cavs were able to pull it out?
Well, I think the players mentioned it after the game, Ethan. This is something that they wanted. This is something that they needed following the game the other night against Philadelphia, where the Cavs won in blowout fashion and the starters were sitting and resting in the fourth quarter. There were a couple of different players talking in the locker room amongst each other saying, are we ever going to play another close game? And they were talking and saying how they wanted to play a close game because that's better preparation for springtime. They can work on their end of game execution. They can talk about strategy. They can figure out what they want to go to and when, what lineups work, which ones don't. Should they go with both Jared Allen and Evan Mobley together? Should they split them up? So, you don't get an opportunity to do those kinds of things unless you play in close games. So for this team, which is second in the NBA in point differential, to get into a close game against whoever it is, whether it's Utah, whether it's Portland, whether it's the Milwaukee Bucks, it doesn't matter the caliber of opponent because you're trying to do things on your own that you think are going to benefit you. So for the Cavs to be in that kind of environment again, put in that situation where the Jazz are making a comeback and it's a one-possession game in the final 5 minutes and it's a one-possession game in the final 2 minutes and actually qualifies as clutch time, for them to execute the way that they did down the stretch, for them to play defense the way that they did down the stretch, I thought all of those things were very positive. They outscored the Jazz 9-2 over the final 148. That's what you want from late game execution. It's about attention to detail. It's about focus. It's about execution. It's about precision. And the Cavs knew where they wanted to go. The Cavs knew what kinds of things they wanted to do offensively. Donovan said it wasn't perfect. He said he messed up something, and he was explaining it to me in the locker room off to the side, what he messed up specifically. And it's understandable that he thinks he messed it up because they could have gotten a better shot. A better look at the basket than the one that they got. But for the most part, it was crisp, it was executed well, and they did the things that they had to do in a late game situation and made the plays that they needed to make in a late game situation. And I think that's beneficial for them moving forward, especially going into this stretch where they're probably going to play a few more close games on the road against playoff caliber opponents.
And Chris, I want to just rattle off some stats coming off of tonight's game for our listeners and watchers. The Cavs are now a NBA best 26-4, right? They're tied for the best 30-game start in team history, dating back to 2008-2009 season. They've won their last 5 straight games by 10 or more points. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games, all coming in December. They're 17-1 at Rocky Morton Fieldhouse. That's the best home record in the NBA. And then you talk about all the different things that come down to why they were able to pull this game out, right? 4 players with 20 or more points scored 120 or more points in 4 straight games, and they've made 20 or more three-pointers in 3 straight games for the first time in franchise history. And Chris, tonight the 4 players that had 20 points were Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and finally, Sam Merrill. Sam Merrill was 6 of 12 from the field, 6 of 11 from 3, and we have been waiting for him to break out of this slump. I think there's been maybe 1 game for the remainder of the season that has been played where he's had 5 threes in a game. And obviously coming against his hometown team, Utah, I think it's just something clicks. The wiring in his brain connects differently when he plays Utah. How important is it for the Cavs to have Sam, not only with Max Strus coming back, play to this caliber, but also be able to just rely on him more than just his cutting and slashing and all those different things?
Yeah, it's important. There's no doubt about it. Sam Merrill's going to have to make shots. That's one of the things that he brings to the table. And Kenny Atkinson has talked about this, and Sam's teammates have talked about this too. He's not a defensive liability. He's competing on the defensive end. He's giving the Cavs something on the defensive end. Everywhere he goes, the defense has to pay attention to him on the offensive end of the floor. So he brings an element of gravity. He makes things easier on his teammates. Statistically, ranked in the top 10 in the NBA in terms of three-man lineups is Donovan Mitchell, Sam Merrill, George Niang. So that shows the kind of impact that he can have and the effect on the game that he can have, despite the fact that he is shooting 34% from three-point range on the season, which is very uncharacteristic for him, which is not up to his standard, which has been angering him throughout the course of this year. He's been very frustrated with his lack of three-point shooting. But at the same time, like, despite him doing those positive things and the Cavs praising him for doing those positive things, he's on this team and he's going to get minutes based on whether or not he's making shots. That's not solely why he's going to get minutes, but he's going to have to make shots to stay in the rotation. He's going to have to make shots to justify a heavy workload, the same kind of workload that he has gotten at this beginning of the season. When they get to full strength, 11 men in the rotation, a couple of guys are going to have their minutes not chopped entirely, but taken from them, a couple here and there. So not saying that he's going to be bounced out of the rotation or anything along those lines, but it's easier for a coach to go away from a guy if he's not doing the thing that he's being paid to do, if he's not doing the thing that is his niche on this team. And Sam Merrill is a marksman. Sam Merrill is somebody who's going to come off the bench. He's going to create chaos. He's going to move around the court. He's going to cut, and he's going to knock down threes. He's going to take a bunch of threes, and he's going to knock down threes. If the part of the equation of him not knocking those threes down, that doesn't happen, like at the beginning of the season, then he's going to be more in jeopardy of losing playing time. I think that's just the reality, and I think he understands it. He's smart enough to understand it. He knows that he needs to make shots. He knows that that's the thing that is supposed to separate him from some of these other guys, not just on this roster, but across the NBA. So for him to, find that shot, build up his confidence, and he talked about it after the game, Ethan, that he kind of like took a basketball break, where he had been working so hard. He had been working on his shot so much, trying to get it back to the level that he wanted it to be at, that he almost overworked himself, especially given the minute load that he's had throughout the course of the season. Like, if you're not playing a whole bunch of minutes in the game, then it's a lot easier to justify, all the work that you do behind the scenes, all that extra work that you do before practice, after practice, before shoot around, after shoot around. So Sam basically said that, he took a couple of days off. He cleared his mind. He tried not thinking about his shot, overthinking when it came to his shot. And he feels like that gave him a little bit more freedom. And that's how he has to play. He has to play with a level of freedom. He has to play with a level of confidence, especially when it comes to his shot, because the Cavs need him to make shots. They do.
Less is more, Chris, especially when it comes to guys that are trying to get used to a different workload, right? Because that's a caveat that comes with playing in a different system that requires more players to get more minutes than they're used to. Obviously, coming out of J.D. Bickerstaff's system, where it was, if you're not making shots, you're not going to play. That's also saying, like, even if you're not going to make shots and you're playing, we still need you to have that element, or it takes away from your value, even if you are bringing value to in different areas. One of the other players that has affected this season in a positive way has been George Niang. Obviously, another guy that used to play for the Utah Jazz. He's been, outside of tonight, he had a plus minus always positive for the entire month of December. And it's been something to see. And especially when you talk about a game where they didn't have Dean Wade, a game where Jared Allen was on the bench for a majority of the second half because he wanted, Kenny Atkinson talked about it after the game, wanting to have more of a spread offense, going to Evan Mobley and George Niang at the 4 to give them more spacing, more opportunity to score the basketball. And George Niang obviously hit some shots as well. He was 2 of 6 from 3, 3 of 8 from the field. But more importantly, there were key plays down the stretch that George made defensively on the boards, rebounding against opposing 7-foot bigs and all these different things that make you understand why Kenny Atkinson has leaned on him. And it's not just because he's a barker and he has a high intensity and all these other things. George Niang is playing valuable minutes. And even if in a more of a workload than he has had maybe in his entire career, I don't have the stats exactly on that, but I think it's interesting to think of how his body that he worked so hard on in this off season, as Chris mentioned in a previous podcast, losing 15 pounds, how he's been able to manage this workload because of the work that he's done and just the value that he's brought on the court.
Yeah, he's been really good. And it's clear that Kenny Atkinson trusts him. I think that's the big thing that stands out to me. Like, Kenny doesn't look at him and say, he's a defensive liability. Kenny looks at him and says, you know what? Like, he's competing out there. Like, he's trying to battle guys underneath. Obviously, there are deficiencies that George is going to have on the defensive end of the floor. Like, he's not going to have the foot speed when he gets pulled out to the perimeter on switches to hang with these faster, quicker, more athletic guys on the perimeter. That's just the reality of it. So there are some matchups that just aren't going to be as favorable for him. But he's competing his butt off on defense. He's rebounding. He's a connector on the offensive end of the floor. He's sharing the basketball. He's running to his spots in transition. So he deserves a lot of credit for the way that he plays. He gets criticized a ton from this fan base, especially when he's not making shots. Because if he's not making shots, then the defensive deficiencies show up a little bit more. And, you start focusing on the flaws as opposed to the strengths. But the things that he does for this team, like, they need the things that he brings to the table. They need his ability to play some small ball 5, depending on who's available for the Cavs and depending on who they're playing against. They need his ability to space the floor, knock down shots, be an offensive trigger, be a ball mover, all those kinds of things. Like, he had the back cut at the end of the game, which was awesome. It was a brilliant play by George. And as he went back down the floor, and kudos to Darius for reading it, seeing it, those guys being on the same page. Colin Sexton, as he's known to do, got caught just flat-footed and ball watching. And George went right behind him for a timely bucket. And as he went down the other end of the floor, he pointed to his head. And he was like, yep, there's my basketball IQ. I saw that one coming. I read that play the right way. And for Kenny to go to him in a late game situation and George to come up with that kind of play, a smart play, reading the game the right way, execution down the stretch, that's going to matter when it comes to Kenny's evaluation of George. And when we get back into another situation like this in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it would not be surprising to see George out there again, to see if Kenny can take advantage of his basketball IQ, the fit that he has, the chemistry that he has. And he's going to continue to try different kinds of things in late game situations to see what works and what doesn't work. And for George to come through at both ends of the floor like he did tonight, in a late game situation, in a close game, in a one possession game in the final 2 minutes, and for him to be on the floor instead of Jared Allen and reward Kenny Atkinson, that's just going to build the trust even more.
And Chris, this is what we're going to talk about in our next podcast, but I wanted to preface it for our listeners to go listen to that one. But like the Cavs being able to lose the rebounding battle by 11 against 2 7-footers while having 2 7-footers, or 1 7-footer and a 6'9.5" guy called Jared Allen with an afro that can rival a 7-footer. I think it's a testament to how the league is changing, what's important, what's not, and also what this league or what this team is leaning into for its principles and how they manage minutes and all those different things. But that's just a preface, and this is where I want to end the podcast, and it's kind of the beginning of the game.
Mhm.
Chris, in your 11 years on the beat, have you seen an entire basketball hoop taken out and replaced before a game without anybody, quote unquote, breaking it? There are some thoughts that Tristan Thompson might have had a dunk or something to cause the feat.
I've never seen that before. No, I mean, I've seen a lot of different things. I've also never seen, basketball players like Darius Garland and Evan Mobley taking a basketball and throwing it into the crowd and having the crowd probably like somewhere between 8 years old and 12 years old, not with the strongest arms in the world, throw the ball back to them and hope that they catch it without it hitting JT Thor in the head or some of the other guys that were sitting on the bench. I've never seen that before either. But it was an unprecedented situation before the game. Like, I've seen a shot clock not work, malfunction, and they have to fix that. I've seen them, mess with the rim and bring out a level to see if the rim was crooked, but I've never seen them have to replace the entire basket. And for them to wheel out a second basket and have it up and running after only like a 35-minute that was pretty impressive. Now, 35-minute delay in a pre-Christmas game when these guys had flights that they wanted to catch back home, and when I wasn't planning to be up as late as I was, that wasn't ideal. But nonetheless, I thought they did a really, really good job, and I think they should be commended. But yeah, it's not something that I have seen before, and it was really interesting for me to kind of watch everything and do like a little bit of a play-by-play of, okay, how did the players handle it? What did Kenny Atkinson do during that time? Did some guys go back to the locker room? Did other guys stay on the court? How were they going to look and play when the game finally got started after a brief 5-minute second warm-up period that they were allowed? So all of that stuff was pretty fascinating to me. But in the words of Darius Garland, hopefully that never happens again.
And you mentioned what everybody did. Like, a majority of the players stayed out on the floor. Mm-hmm. Kenny Atkinson did not. Kenny said he went back to his office and just like hung out and watched film. Like, that is how much of a basketball nut this guy is, right? Like, he is willing to take a 30-minute intermission from the game because he mentioned to his players before that it felt like it was going to take a while. And he went and watched more film rather than like hanging out with the team or being goofy or anything. And he went and got to business, right? Because whatever you want to think about. And the other thing that I took away from this is, you mentioned it, the joy that Darius Garland not only has when he's playing the game of basketball, but brings to the arena. Like, he is he has such a light to him this season. And it's, we talk about how that is much different from last year and how that has impacted him with his life off the court and all those different things. But to see him do that pregame, like Chris mentioned, hanging out with fans and like walking past the entire like row to go talk to different people, and then come back and do his skips when he's hitting jump shots, do his little celebrations, the kiss to the sky, all these different things. For Darius, and I asked Kenny Atkinson this after the game, there is nothing better for Darius Garland than when he is playing with joy. When he is playing with joy, there is no level higher than he can go. And that doesn't have to always do with scoring. It can do with passing. It can do with rebounding. It can do with just keeping people lively on the bench. He had 8 assists and just 2 turnovers tonight, Chris. Last season around this time, we were talking about his turnover numbers to the point where we were wondering, like, what's going on with Darius Garland? This was before the injury to his jaw. Obviously, this happened like at this point he's injured. But this is before the jaw injury. This is before everything with his grandmother and things of that nature. Like, turnovers were Darius Garland's Achilles heel. And this season, they're not. What do you think?
Yeah.
Have you talked to him about that? Like, what's different for him?
Well, I mean, I think the joy is the thing that stands out to everybody that has spent any time around Darius. He's just a different person this year. And he was open and honest with me when we sat down during training camp at IMG Academy about losing his joy for basketball because last year was not fun. It was not fun for him for a variety of reasons, and we don't have to rehash all of them. Um, but he's having more fun this year. I think the way that he's playing allows himself to have more confidence and have more fun because he's playing well, because he's shooting the ball well, because he's not making careless turnovers, um, because he feels like this team has a chance. This team has a chance to compete at the highest level, and he can be a big part of that because he's in the All Star conversation again. You know, Darius came into last year, Ethan, and he wanted to show that he belonged in the superstar tier of point guards. That was the next step for him individually. That's what he thought. And he wasn't playing like that. And when you have a certain level of expectation for yourself and other people have an expectation of you and you don't meet that, it's hard to have fun. It's hard to play with joy. It's hard to be goofy and playful and stuff like that. Um, but the way that he's playing this year, it is a different Darius. And you know, it was a quiet thing for a while last year, but like everybody around the team, whether it was front office members or it was coaches on the staff or it was teammates, they were all saying it. Like this isn't Darius. This isn't the Darius that we know. This isn't the Darius that is a jokester behind the scenes, that is, you know, hitting people with a bag of clothes, that is just interacting with people, whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? And they just felt something off with him throughout the entire season. And you just don't get that feeling around him anymore. You get a feeling that he's loving this team, he's loving his teammates, he's loving the way that this team is playing, he's loving the standard that he's playing to, and it's carrying over onto the floor. And I also think that, you know, part of his evolution in terms of the low turnovers and stuff is, you know, the team is not in a slog offensively in the half court where, you know, offense felt like a chore for this group. It felt like they had to work so hard just to create a sliver of space, just to create a good look. And with the free flowing offense, the player friendly offense, um, it's not a situation where Darius has to feel like he's doing so much just to create offense, or Donovan feels like he has to do so much to create offense and sometimes goes outside themselves, or sometimes takes unnecessary risks, or sometimes it's just hard on the offense. Offense was hard for the Cavs last year. It was hard for Darius. It was hard for Donovan. And I think with that comes mistakes. I think with that comes errant passes. I think with that comes turnovers. I think with that comes sloppiness. I think with that comes working against a very short shot clock and you're rushed and all that kind of stuff. And it just feels like offense is coming easier for this team and nobody is having to go outside themselves to create quality looks. And that goes for Evan, that goes for Jarrett, that goes for Donovan, that goes for Darius. But especially Darius, who oftentimes last year caught in situations where end of the shot clock, defensive attention focused on him, second defender comes to blitz him late in the shot clock, and he turns the ball over. Or he's trying to drive down the lane, defense collapses, jumps in the air without a plan, and throws the ball away. This team just doesn't have to work as hard for quality offense. And I think that trickles throughout the entire roster.
I agree. And the only point that I'm going to add to that is I think his pro dribble is helping him as well because he's not picking up his dribble or making jump passes as much unless he's like literally falling out of bounds. So the pro dribble is allowing him to maintain his dribble even if he has to circle around like LaMelo Ball did back in high school or whatever. It might seem funny or look funny, but it's definitely important for the Cavs offense to continue to create better looks. But with that being said, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays,
Merry Christmas.
Happy Hanukkah to whoever celebrates all the holidays. We appreciate everybody that listens, tunes in, whatever you do to tune into this podcast. We appreciate it. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will be back with another episode later this week after the holidays, but we're going to take a little hiatus, let you guys enjoy your families without hearing my annoying voice, Chris's beautiful voice. But thank you guys.
Disagree with that.
But with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your questions for the next rendition of Hey Chris. It will not be this week. It will be the following week. To do so, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way for you to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe, safe travels. We out.